Welcome back. This is episode 5 of Banking APIs with the Temenos Interaction Framework. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to handle API state or flow control and also API metadata for screen control. You might recall from the first episode we started to look at the API documentation and APIs that let you navigate through to a target or through to a service that we want to consume. So we created this little origination service where the initial entry point had just one link to get a list of customers. From that list of customers we could see the customers that we were interested in, or we could create new customers. Our main expectation of a client using this API is that they would bind directly to this link that creates new customers, or bind directly to this URL that lists customers. We don't expect the client to know how to create other things. So to create a new function like creating an account, we would have to add a new link to each of these customers. Or we could add a link here that they could navigate to, but it doesn't make sense to create an account without a customer first. So we would want to add it to the customer. So to do that, we would add our link here to the customer info. So here we can see our link to create the new customer, and we can see here a link to view an individual customer. So what we'd want to do is create this link. It will be a post to a new, just like all the other resources in the system. There's the new one, and we'd give it a title, something like open account. Now every customer here would end up with a link to open an account, and that would be good for an API point of view in terms of the documentation, but functionally we might only want to open an account or allow the client to open an account when this KYC check has been completed. So to do that, we really want to make this link conditional and not show it all the time. This is quite a unique way of communicating state to the client or communicating available options to the client. So you can see here, what I've done is just pasted the link that I had earlier where I've had this condition where I check that it's okay to show this link. And the way this works is that the OK is a sort of equivalent to an HTTP 200 OK, or you can do a not found if you don't want a resource to exist so that this link shows. And with these two simple conditions, OK and not found, you can decide when to show this link. So this is quite a unique part of the interaction framework. And one of the best things about using this technique of simply another resource is that the logic here can be in the back-end system, and it can stay in the back-end system instead of bleeding out to the client. If we didn't use links, we would expect every client to understand this attribute here, KYC check is complete, to yes. Doing it this way, we leave this logic about when the KYC is complete in our system. And we could take this a step further, we may want to take this a step further and actually make a call to the back-end system to know when that check has been completed. Here I've taken a little bit of a shortcut and used this simple match command to say that when the value is yes, that's when we'll show the link. So if I take that example there, and I can run the same thing in Postman, it just happens that I've already got this filter here for the KYC check. I run that, I get just a few customers now that have the KYC check complete, and you can see that I've got the links here for open an account, whereas if I run it again without that criteria, I get links. I don't get links on ones that don't have that KYC check complete. See here, there's no link. So that takes us on to the next phase, which would be the screen control. Building an API this way, it really starts to look much more like an interface much more like a user agent than it does just a simple API. And what we're doing is we're taking steps towards creating a user agent. So we have these clients that become much more adaptive and understand what the server is telling them they're allowed to do, and they start to follow. And that can be at different levels. This way of following when links are available, but it can also be controlling of the screen. So one of the things that you might have seen on this new link, if we followed it and did that new action here, we posted to it, is that there were things there other than input. So there's things like this metadata and validate. So validate, we can imagine what it would do without looking at the documentation, is that it just does some simple validation and return errors, but would never actually try to do the update. But the metadata gets a little bit more interesting. We can submit to metadata here, and it will tell us what we can do with the screen. So if I take that, and instead of trying to post to it to create, I'll post to metadata and see what it tells me I can do. So remember, this is just the defaulted customer. And we'll just use that same entry as a post. Okay. So we've now posted that default entry to the metadata link. And you can see all sorts of interesting stuff starts to come back. So here it's returning entries, but rather than records, or customer records, we're actually getting back metadata entries. So you can see here the customer code, the field, it can tell us, the backend can tell us when we can display it and when it's mandatory. So if you imagine taking this a step further, if we were creating a simple form of questions that should only show when other questions have been answered in a certain way. So for example, are you married? And then it says, who are you married to? Or that kind of relationship information question. That metadata can be processed in the back end instead of being bled out to the client and all that logic spread everywhere in the front end clients. And again, this is a really, starting to become a user agent that drives the conversation from the server and lets us develop user agents that are much more robust to change. And in fact, user agents built this way really don't need a version in the API at all, because they can be adapted and driven by the server. Okay, so we've seen there just a couple of ways of controlling the clients through the links and the flow control, and driving the screen through the metadata. And that concludes episode 5. And thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.